They said he was too beautiful to belong to this world, soft as silk, eyes like still water, and a voice so delicate it could hush a room. In the year 1502, a 13-year-old boy named Lu Guang was taken from his village near the southern ports of Ming, China, loaded onto a merchant boat like porcelain cargo, and delivered into the hands of a man who wore robes embroidered with dragons. Lu Guang had no family name anymore, only a new title moon companion. He wasn't a servant, he wasn't a son, he was something far more valuable and more dangerous. Inside the forbidden city, behind corridors guarded by eunuchs and scented with sandalwood, he became the most closely kept secret of the emperor, not just a favorite, not just a plaything, but a confidant, trained in poetry, music, and seduction, taught to kneel like a scholar, speak like a sage, and smile like he felt nothing. The emperors, known in court records as Zhengde, had many concubines, but none like Lu Guang. He took the boy hunting, shared war strategies with him in the middle of the night. Once, during a state banquet, he interrupted his generals to ask Lu Guang if the food was too spicy. The court scribes left that part out, but the gossip spread faster than wildfire. And then, as quickly as he rose, Lu Guang vanished. No official death record, no grave, just an unfinished painting left in the emperor's private chamber, one brushstroke shy of completion, as if the artist had been dragged away mid-breath. Rumors said he was poisoned. Others claimed he fled dressed as a palace maid. But one thing was certain: when Lu Guang disappeared, so did a piece of the emperor himself. Centuries later, in a sealed archive beneath the Palace Museum in Beijing, a torn silk robe was found stained with something darker than time, and bearing a name no historian had dared to write down. Until now, before he became a ghost inside the emperor's palace. Lu Guang was just another hungry boy in Jiangnan, born into a floodplain village where rice wilted in cracked soil and families survived by selling anything that would sell. The year was 1501, and southern China was recovering from a failed harvest and a brutal tax season. Money didn't trickle down from the court, it drained upward, like blood from the neck of a lamb. Lu's father died hauling cargo upriver for a merchant who never learned his name. His mother stitched funeral clothes for strangers. They lived behind a tea shop that hadn't sold tea in months. Then one day, a man with inked fingernails and a golden tooth arrived by boat. He carried silk bolts on one arm and a promise on his tongue. He told the villagers he was looking for talent, not laborers, not girls, boys, smart ones, beautiful ones. You'll never go hungry again, he said, and they believed him. Lu Guang didn't resist. Not really. He walked into the broker's boat with a satchel of fried wheat and a wooden comb his mother had carved. By the time they reached the port of Hangzhou, he was given a new name. His old clothes burned, his hair oiled and shaped into something soft and deliberate. He was told never to smile too wide, to keep his voice even, to blink slowly. He was not a child anymore. He was an investment. The first training compound was hidden behind a lacquered gate near the city's western lake. At night, the boys slept on straw mats under silk banners printed with poems they weren't allowed to read. During the day, they learned to bow without trembling, to write with ink made of oxbone, to serve tea without noise, and to sing in the upper register for hours without water. One boy collapsed after 12 straight hours of Guqin training and didn't get up. No one said his name again. Lu Guang learned fast. He had to. Every week, the lowest-ranked boy disappeared. No explanation. Just an empty cushion the next morning. Some cried. He didn't. He watched. He memorized faces. He listened to footsteps in the hall, counting which ones stopped at which doors. He learned to adjust his pitch to the season, high and bright in spring, low and haunting in winter. By the second month, he could recite Tang Dynasty verses backwards. By the third, he could keep pace with a palace eunuch in calligraphy. And then came the first test. It wasn't a paper exam. It wasn't even spoken. One afternoon, without warning, a black lacquered palanquin arrived. A man in imperial blue stepped out. He didn't speak. He walked past the boys, stopping briefly to tilt Lu Guang's chin up with a gloved finger. Then he left. That night, Lu Guang was stripped, scrubbed with camellia oil, and dressed in clothes made for someone else's body. He was given a perfume that made his eyes burn. A needle was driven through his ear, then removed without explanation. His escort to the capital did not speak to him once. He watched the landscape change from rice paddies to stone bridges to red walls taller than any house he'd ever seen. The Forbidden City wasn't a place. It was a hunger. When he stepped into the receiving hall, it was past midnight. Dozens of oil lamps flickered against carved dragons on gold pillars. The emperor was not alone, but everyone else stood behind him, silent, motionless, eyes averted. Lu Guang had been trained for this. He bowed low. He spoke his rehearsed greeting, and then, only then did he dare to lift his gaze. The man who would hold his fate for the next 6 years looked nothing like the portraits. He was younger, his mouth curled like he was always in on a joke. His robes trailed across the floor like rivers. And when he spoke, it was not in command but in curiosity. "You're smaller than they said." Lu Guang said nothing. The emperor laughed. Good. That night, no door closed. No word was spoken outside of breath and silk. But when morning came, Lu Guang didn't return to the training house. His new chamber had no locks, no mirrors, only scrolls, incense, and a single bed too wide for one person. He was not told what he had become, but he understood. He was introduced to the court not through ceremony, but through silence. No titles, no proclamation, just a new face at the emperor's left hand. Lu Guang sat during the morning councils, draped in ivory silk, pretending not to listen while the empire argued over borders and bribes. His presence was never addressed, his opinions were never asked. But he was there, and everyone knew what that meant. It began with glances. Ministers watched him more than they watched the maps. Generals stopped mid-sentence when he tilted his head. Even the eunuchs who served the tea poured slower when they reached his side. In a court that lived and died by hierarchy, Lu Guang was neither noble nor servant, yet somehow more dangerous than either. One night, a scroll bearing the Imperial seal arrived in his chamber. It contained no words, only a single red plum blossom. Painted by hand, when he stepped into the banquet hall, the ceiling shimmered with lanterns. The emperor stood at the center, arms open. And for the first time, the court watched him not as a boy, but as something far more calculated, a spectacle. He danced without instruction, not the choreography taught in the training compound, but something new, fluid, jagged, unpolished. It wasn't meant to be beautiful, it was meant to unsettle, to possess. And it did. One nobleman dropped his chopsticks, another spilled wine down his chest. When Lu Guang finished, the hall stayed silent for 7 heartbeats. Then the emperor laughed long, loud, indulgent, and called for the music to continue. The boy was escorted back to his chamber. No one dared speak of it again. That performance marked a shift. He no longer sat in silence. The emperor began asking his opinion in public. Does this color suit me? Should we punish the border lords? What would you do if it were your throne? The questions were playful, framed as jokes, but the answers carried weight. 1 week later, a governor was demoted. 2 weeks after that, a tax law changed. Lu Guang never gave direct orders. He never signed a decree, but the edicts mirrored his language. And then came the tiger. It was during the midsummer hunt, held in the Imperial Park south of the palace walls. Courtiers came dressed in leather and gold. The emperor, mounted on a white horse, carried a bow carved from horn and pearl. Lu Guang rode beside him in a chariot lined with wolf fur, his hair pinned with jade. When the beast emerged a striped blur from the reeds, Lu Guang didn't flinch. The emperor loosed the arrow. It missed. The tiger did not. The general who leapt between them survived with a shattered arm. Lu Guang, untouched, sat frozen until the guards brought it down. Blood soaked the grass. The emperor dismounted, looked at him, and whispered something no one else heard. After that day, rumors swirled. Some said Lu Guang had bewitched the court, that he fed the emperor herbs wrapped in silk, that he owned a dagger made from a meteorite, that his voice could turn ink to poison. One scroll, anonymously submitted to the censor's office, accused him of plotting to replace the heir with a bastard child. It was unsigned. It vanished by morning. But fear had already seated itself in the palace. The Empress Dowager refused to enter any hall where Lu Guang had been seen. ministers began submitting proposals through intermediaries. Afraid to speak in his presence, 2 concubines reportedly tried to poison his bathwater. One disappeared. The other was found hanging from a cypress tree. Her hands dyed black. Lu Guang said nothing. He kept smiling. Then came the day he asked to leave the palace. It was a simple request, delivered through a private letter. He wished to visit a temple, to pray, to mourn his mother, whose death anniversary was approaching. The emperor agreed without hesitation. A procession was prepared, guards, horses, ceremonial drums. But Lu Guang left alone, at dawn, in a plain robe, before the city gates opened. He returned at dusk, wet from rain, with a single stick of incense and a scroll tucked into his sleeve. No one ever saw what was written on that scroll. But that night, the emperor summoned no one, not his ministers, not his lovers, not even Lu Guang. For the first time in 3 years, the palace went quiet. The silence lasted 3 days. No lanterns were lit in the emperor's wing. No petitions were accepted. The palace corridors, once filled with the shuffle of silk and whispered schemes, fell into a hush thick enough to be tasted. Lu Guang remained inside his chamber. He neither ate nor spoke. When the servants entered, he was seated by the window, watching the koi pond, his fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain cup. No one dared ask why he hadn't been summoned. On the 4th night, the drums returned, soft at first, like a memory, then louder, bolder, pulsing through the marble halls. Lu Guang was called back not to the private chambers, but to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. He arrived dressed in midnight blue, hair unpinned, face bare. The emperor sat alone at the center, a single candle flickering beside him. No courtiers, no guards, just the 2 of them, as they had been in the beginning. "I had a dream," the emperor said. "You stood on a mountain of gold, and beneath it were bones." Lu Guang did not speak. "You smiled at me," the emperor continued, "but your eyes were full of ash." That night, no laughter echoed through the halls, no music followed. When Lu Guang left the chamber, his shoulders were damp with sweat, though the air was cold. The next morning, a decree was issued. 5 ministers were reassigned to distant provinces. 1 was imprisoned. The official reason, corruption. The whispered reason, they had spoken Lu Guang's name with contempt. The message was clear. The boy was no longer just favored. He was protected. That protection, however, came with a cost. Every gesture now mattered. Every word he uttered became a cipher. Courtiers read his silences like omens. Once, he frowned at the taste of wine 3 days later. The supplier vanished. Another time, he corrected the pitch of a court singer by dusk. She was dismissed, stripped of title and home. Lu Guang never asked for these punishments. He never gave commands. But the palace had learned to fear proximity. Fear, however, is a brittle kind of loyalty. On the eve of the spring festival, as red banners unfurled across the capital and firecrackers popped like musket fire, a courier arrived bearing a gift box, inside a pair of embroidered slippers, laced with wolfsbane. The message was unmistakable. Poisoned, but elegant. The emperor laughed when he saw it. At least they still respect your taste. But Lu Guang no longer laughed. He began sleeping less, walking the gardens at odd hours. He took no visitors, spoke only when spoken to, and when he did speak, it was with the precision of someone counting every breath left in their body. His performances ended. The music in his chambers fell silent. Even his robes grew paler, as though the color had drained from him. The emperor noticed. He sent new fabrics, rare teas, a white falcon from the western provinces. Lu Guang accepted them all, bowed, and returned to his room. That winter, snow fell thicker than it had in a decade. The plum trees in the inner court died beneath the weight. So did one of the older eunuchs, frozen in the corridor outside Lu Guang's chamber. He had been waiting for a reply. No message came, and then a discovery. Hidden behind a folding screen in Lu Guang's quarters, a monk's robe was found faded, patched, stained with incense and old wax. Alongside it, a wooden prayer bead cracked down the center, and a scroll titled, "Silence Beneath Heaven." The title alone was enough to alarm the court. Philosophical texts were permitted, but not ones unsigned, not ones hidden. Lu Guang was summoned to explain. He did not appear The emperor sent a second summons. Again, no answer. At dusk, guards entered his quarters. The room was empty. The fire was cold. A single window had been left open, though the wind outside howled like something wild. On the lacquered writing table, one object remained. A porcelain cup, rim cracked, half filled with water. No note, no blood, no footprints. By dawn, the palace gates were sealed, the capital searched, rivers dragged, carts stopped, but Lu Guang had vanished, as if he had never been there at all. He had disappeared without a sound, but the silence he left behind was deafening. The Imperial palace, once obsessed with his presence, now obsessed over his absence. Guards rotated in double shifts, courtiers walked on eggshells, ministers wore darker robes and avoided eye contact. The emperor did not speak of him, but ordered the stone path leading to Lu Guang's chamber to be repaved, as if to erase the memory embedded in every step. Still, the air remembered. Whispers returned like mold after a storm. Some claimed Lu Guang had taken his own life in the lake near the southern wall, his body weighed down by jade. Others said he had fled to the mountains disguised as a monk, his face scarred to avoid recognition. One rumor insisted he never left at all, that he lived hidden in the maze of servant quarters, protected by eunuchs too loyal for their own safety. The stories contradicted themselves, but none faded. The emperor, once known for his indulgence, grew severe. He stopped attending court sessions. He refused music. Paintings of spring hunts were removed from the great halls. His falcon, once Lu Guang's favorite, was found dead in its cage on the 15th night after the disappearance. He ordered the ceremonial drums destroyed. There will be no more echoes, he said. And yet, echoes persisted. In one of the outer towers, a servant boy claimed to find a robe stitched with silver cranes, Lu Guang's insignia tucked into a basket of coal. In the library annex, a scroll appeared, unsigned, written in a style unmistakably his, a meditation on impermanence, ending with the line, "Even shadows leave traces." The emperor dismissed both reports as fantasy, but he ordered the scroll burned. Personally, then came the drought. Rain stopped falling across the southern provinces. Rice yields collapsed. Trade along the Grand Canal slowed to a crawl. Superstition, always lurking beneath the court's lacquered surface, began to claw its way into conversation. Had the boy been an omen? Had his vanishing offended the heavens? One priest, summoned from a Taoist sanctuary in Sichuan, suggested a ceremonial cleansing. He was dismissed the same day. Another claimed the emperor himself had been hexed by proximity to a spirit too beautiful to be mortal. His tongue was cut out. Inside the palace, the staff grew restless. A cook disappeared, then a scribe. The guards reported hearing flutes in the night, though none had been played by midsummer. The lotus pond behind the west pavilion dried up completely in its cracked bed. A single jade hairpin was found. The emperor kept it in his sleeve. The council began pressing for marriage. They reminded him of dynastic duty, of alliances unfulfilled. He agreed in writing, but no ceremony followed. The chosen bride remained cloistered in her residence, never once received in private audience. Her dowry was untouched. Then, on the eve of the Mid-Autumn Festival, as the capital prepared for lanterns and mooncakes, the emperor vanished. His guards found the outer gate open, his robes folded on a bench. A trail of sandalwood ash led toward the plum garden. The trees, though still bare from winter's bite, smelled faintly of camellia oil. By morning, he returned, his expression unreadable, his voice soft. "There is no need for moonlight," he said. "The shadows are enough." The court carried on, but the empire knew something had shifted. Provinces reported increased banditry. Corruption spread among tax officials. Border skirmishes flared without provocation. The emperor, once involved in every policy, now signed decrees with barely a glance. He spoke to no one, unless required. He smiled only once, at a painting of a tiger with no eyes. Years passed. When the emperor died, the court commissioned no portrait. His tomb was built beneath a willow grove, with no inscriptions. But in the private gallery he left behind, one item drew attention, an unfinished painting of a boy sitting beneath a plum tree. Brush poised, gaze distant. expression neither joy nor sorrow. The artist had left no signature, only a title in the corner presence. Decades passed, but his name was never spoken again within the palace walls, not in the records, not in the rituals, not even by those who had once whispered it like a spell. The empire changed emperors, shifted capitals, rewrote tax codes, and redrew borders. But the silence around Lu Guang held, as if the absence of his name was a kind of law more permanent than marble, more binding than blood. Scholars avoided the subject. Court painters erased his likeness from group portraits, painting over him with trees, clouds, ceremonial animals. Monks who had once served tea during his processions claimed to have never seen him. The scrolls he had copied, the music he had composed, the calligraphy he had practiced all disappeared, one by one, like stars behind morning fog. Yet nothing truly vanishes. A foreign envoy from Lisbon recorded in his diary the existence of a shadow courtier during his visit to Beijing in 1525, a young man seated behind a golden screen, whose face no one dared describe. A century later, in the diaries of a Korean diplomat, there appears a brief reference to a figure called the Silent One, said to dwell in the emperor's dreams, dictating laws from beyond the veil. Even in the 1700s, during the Qianlong Emperor's reign, a forbidden opera circulated among underground performers. It told the story of a boy born from moonlight, loved by a dragon king, and swallowed by the wind. The libretto was burned wherever found. Performers who sang it twice were jailed. Those who sang it 3 times vanished. In the countryside, rumors mutated into superstition. Some said any household that painted a plum tree on their door would suffer a child's death before the year's end. Others left out bowls of water on cold nights, believing the boy's spirit might pass through and need a place to rest. No one remembered his name, only that he had once been too beautiful, too quiet, and too close to power. By the 19th century, the empire was collapsing under foreign pressure and internal revolt. As palaces burned and archives were plundered, fragments began to resurface. A single earring made of glass and copper, found buried in a garden near the Forbidden City. A silk slipper too small for any known foot, discovered behind a loose brick in an abandoned pavilion. A diary belonging to a low-ranking official who had worked during the Zhengde Emperor's final years. One page, dated 1511, read, "Only he is gone," but the walls still listen. When the Republic was declared, and the last emperor forced from his throne, most of the inner court's artifacts were sold, stolen, or sealed. But a curator at the National Museum of History once told of a package that arrived anonymously in 1936. Inside was a scroll, fragile with age, ink faded, but legible under the right light. It contained a single poem, written in classical verse. Its final line, "I wore no crown, but bore its weight." The scroll was never displayed. Today, the official records mention nothing. Tour guides speak only of the emperors, the generals, the wars. The boy who altered the rhythm of an entire dynasty is never named. But sometimes, when the wind shifts over the palace grounds, guides pause mid-sentence. Visitors glance toward empty balconies, and in the plum garden, now restored and blooming each spring. A particular tree never bears fruit. It leans slightly east, its trunk pale and narrow, its roots curled around stone. The caretakers call it the listening tree. They do not water it. It never dies. But every so often, a white silk ribbon appears knotted to one of its branches. No one claims responsibility. No one ever sees it tied. And yet it's always there. In the decades that followed, the palace was transformed into a monument. Tourists came with cameras and maps, stepping through gates once sealed to all but blood. They walked the stone paths where emperors had paced, peered into courtyards once flooded with court music, and paused before thrones no longer occupied. But the chambers closest to the west wall remained closed. No explanation was given. The staff simply referred to them as maintenance zones, though no repairs were ever seen. Guides skipped them. Floor plans left them blank. Inside those locked rooms, layers of dust thickened over time. A carved incense table, still marked with ash, a copper bowl resting at a tilt. Behind one lacquered panel, a mirror with a hairline fracture running from corner to corner, long enough to split a reflection in two. These details were not documented, not because they were secret, but because they were inconvenient. Governments changed, wars came and went, and still no official record emerged, but archivists whispered of missing files, a ledger from 1506 with names carefully blacked out, a roster of chamber assignments with one designation left as an inked blot, a physician's log noting routine treatment for stress, night tremors, auditory hallucinations, without any patient listed. One museum employee recalled a handwritten note folded inside an antique fan. Tucked among the archives, what remains of a voice, when no one is willing to remember the sound? By the mid-20th century, foreign historians began piecing fragments together, not through official documents, but through echoes. A British anthropologist found references to the Emperor's Moon in folk songs collected from rural provinces. An American linguist studying endangered dialects discovered a repeated figure in oral legends, the boy who sat too close to the fire and melted, in each case. The name was gone, but the story clung to the margins. What unnerved researchers wasn't the absence of data, it was the symmetry of that absence. Across centuries, languages, dynasties, the same shape recurred: a boy, beloved by power, erased by proximity to it. One document surfaced in the early 1990s, misfiled in the restoration records of a Beijing university. It was a sketch on rice paper, faded, partially burned. It depicted a pair of hands holding a scroll, surrounded by inked flames. At the bottom, barely visible, was a line written in seal script: "If silence is loyalty, then who profits from our forgetting?" No one claimed authorship, no one confirmed authenticity. The university did not publish the find, but within months, the original was moved into private storage. When asked, the archivist in charge said only, "That drawing frightened people." In a society where the past is carefully curated, omission becomes a kind of architecture. It builds corridors of silence more enduring than stone. The story of the nameless concubine, the boy who became a weapon. A mirror. A memory was not just hidden. It was institutionalized, stripped from history not in one stroke, but in 1,000 careful edits, each act small enough to be dismissed, each absence justified. Yet the void he left was too precise. On the anniversary of the emperor's death each year, a single visitor is seen leaving white chrysanthemums at the northeast gate. No photographs, no records. The guards never stop them. Some say it's a tradition from a lost family line. Others believe it's symbolic, a tribute to the forgotten. But one curator, long since retired, recalled finding a pressed petal in a sealed book of palace etiquette from the 16th century, tucked between two rules, one about silence in the emperor's presence, the other about never stepping before him unless summoned. The petal had not decayed. Its color had not dulled. Pressed silence, like the boy himself, can outlast the empire that tried to bury it. History does not forget because it chooses to. It forgets because forgetting serves someone. What was done to Lu Guang was not just an erasure of a person, but of a possibility of a kind of closeness, of beauty weaponized, of silence turned into structure. His absence is not a footnote, it is a design. And in that design, the lines are too clean to be accidental. He was never crowned, he held no title, but his presence bent a dynasty. His name, unwritten, traveled further than edicts ever could. Every time a story is told, with a space where a name should be, he is there. Every time power insists that it loves without consequence, he is there, not as a ghost, not as myth, but as a wound the empire could not cauterize. Some stories end in tragedy, others vanish before they're allowed to begin. And then there are stories like his buried deep, disassembled piece by piece, until all that remains is a pattern no one dares name. But patterns speak, even when the names don't survive. So if you found him here, between the silences, know this: he was not lost. He was made to be forgotten, and someone, somewhere, wanted you to remember anyway.